Every single one of the 27 advanced civilizations in human history, they actually share this one hidden, almost bizarre trait in their origin story.
Yeah, and it's definitely not what you'd expect.
Right. I mean, they didn't start with some once-in-a-generation genius,
Mhm.
and, they didn't start with the sudden invention of a groundbreaking technology.
Now, they basically started with a road trip.
Literally a migration. Like the
Yeah.
actual friction of packing up, leaving a homeland, and just stepping out into the terrifying unknown. That is the universal catalyst for human progress.
Because without movement, there is no civilization. It completely shatters the way we're taught to view history.
It really does. Because we tend to look at empires as these static entities that just grew out of the soil like ancient oak trees.
Exactly. But when you apply a purely sociological lens to human development, the roots of civilization aren't in the soil at all. They are in the disruption.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. We are speaking directly to you, the curious mind out there trying to find a shortcut to being well-informed.
Because we know you're looking for those profound aha moments, but you want them without drowning in the endless sea of information overload.
Totally. And today, our mission is absolutely massive. We are unpacking this towering stack of sociological and philosophical notes.
Right, derived from the lectures of Ali SHARI'ATI. Specifically, we're looking at his works on the sociology of Islam and man in Islam.
And the goal today is to really look at how these frameworks attempt to completely reframe our understanding of human history.
Yeah, we're going to deconstruct the actual mechanics of how societies change. And we're going to dive into the very definition of humanism, all through the lens of Islam.
Now, before we really get into the weeds here, setting the stage is crucial.
Oh, absolutely.
Regardless of your personal religious background, like whether you're devout, entirely secular, agnostic, whatever, the source material we have today offers this fascinating, purely sociological masterclass on how civilizations rise, fall, and are engineered.
Yeah, and that's a vital distinction to make right up front. We are looking at this strictly through the lens of sociology, anthropology, and history. We aren't doing theology today.
Exactly. And I want to explicitly state our neutrality pledge for this deep dive. We're going to explore texts that discuss various religious doctrines, historical conflicts, deeply held beliefs.
Right.
But our aim here isn't to endorse any specific theological or political viewpoint. We are not taking sides and, we aren't preaching.
No, not at all. We are simply here to impartially explore these fascinating ideas, the intellectual frameworks, and the complex arguments presented in the original source material.
Because we want to understand the architecture of these ideas, because frankly, the architecture is stunning.
It really is. When you strip away all the modern preconceptions and just look at the structural logic being presented in these lectures, it maps human existence in a way that is incredibly provocative.
I promise you, by the end of this conversation, you are going to view your own free will and that constant, exhausting, daily tug-of-war between your base habits and your highest aspirations in a completely new light.
It's going to change how you look at a lot of things.
So where do we actually begin this diagnosis of human society?
Well, we have to begin with the absolute first step required to understand anything deeply, let alone something as complex as a civilization.
Okay, what's step one?
Before you can analyze a society, before you can diagnose an illness, you have to have the right methodology.
The right tool for the job.
Exactly. Because if your foundational method is flawed, it really doesn't matter how smart you are. Your conclusions will be disastrous.
I mean, think about the intellectuals of our era for a second. There's this overwhelming tendency in modern discourse, whether it's on social media, in op-eds, television panels, to just sit around and vividly diagnose the rot of society.
Well, we love diagnosing the rot.
We really do. We point out the corruption, the apathy, the economic disparity, and Shariati calls this out brilliantly. He essentially says, we are confusing moaning with scientific analysis.
Right.
Like, we haven't scientifically analyzed our sufferings. We've just become world-class complainers. Okay, let's unpack this. Why is moaning so dangerous?
Because moaning provides the illusion of action.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. When you sit in a cafe and eloquently talk about how terrible things are, you get a dopamine hit.
You feel like you're helping.
You feel like you are engaging with the problem, but it is functionally useless.
It's like a patient screaming in pain in an emergency room, right?
Yeah.
They're giving this highly articulate speech about how much their abdomen hurts.
Right, but absolutely refusing to let the doctor draw blood or run a scan.
Exactly. The era of just talking has to end. True action must be rooted in a methodical, scientific investigation of the suffering.
And what's fascinating is the historical proof he offers for why methodology matters so much more than raw intelligence.
Yeah, because we always assume that progress requires a genius.
We do. But if you look at the ancient Greeks, Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, these were arguably some of the greatest raw intellects in human history.
Oh, without a doubt. Their mental horsepower was just unmatched.
Yet medieval Europe, which relied almost entirely on Aristotelian analogical reasoning, stagnated for 1,000 years.
A millennium. A millennium of apathy, disease, and just a total lack of scientific progress, all while they were holding the foundational texts of absolute geniuses.
So let's unpack why that happened, because it wasn't a lack of brain power. The stagnation occurred because the methodology was fundamentally flawed.
How so?
Aristotelian logic relied really heavily on syllogisms and deductive reasoning for these grand, untested premises.
Okay,
It was beautiful in a debate, but it didn't give you a framework for physically testing the world.
right. Now contrast that with the innovators of the modern era, like take Thomas Edison.
Perfect example.
Edison's raw general perception, his sheer philosophical intellect, might have been inferior to, like, the third-class pupils of Aristotle's academy.
Oh yeah, Edison wasn't going to write the Nicomachean Ethics. He wasn't a profound philosopher.
Not at all. But he created over 1,000 world-changing inventions. Why? Because he possessed the correct scientific method.
Right. He had a framework for empirical observation, for failing, for iterating, for testing a specific hypothesis.
The method amplified his intellect, whereas Aristotle's method eventually trapped his successors.
It's so true.
It makes me think of an analogy, like imagine two people trying to reach a distant city.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
One person is severely lame, walking with a really heavy limp,
Right.
but they are on this clearly marked, smoothly paved, perfectly lit highway.
Okay, they've got a good path.
Yeah. And the other person is an Olympic sprinter, the fastest, most physically gifted human alive. But they are dropped into the middle of a thorny, winding, foggy swamp with no compass.
And wow, yeah,
Who wins? The person with the limp is going to reach the destination faster every single time.
every time.
Doesn't matter how fast the sprinter is if their environment and their path are fundamentally broken.
That is a perfect encapsulation of the premise. The lame person on the right path beats the champion runner, who is completely lost.
So true.
And this crucial concept of methodology is then applied directly to the study of religion.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, if we want to understand a massive world-altering force like Islam, we can't just rely on emotional attachment or philosophical debating. We have to study it methodically, almost exactly as you would study a historical person.
Okay, let's break that down. How do you study a religion like a person? What does that actual methodology look like?
If you want to deeply understand a great historical figure, say Abraham Lincoln or Napoleon, you generally do two things simultaneously.
Okay.
First, you read their written works. You study their letters, their speeches, the direct output of their mind.
So for Islam, that means scientifically studying the Quran.
Exactly. Not just reciting it blindly, but analyzing its structure, its vocabulary, its sociological commands.
Okay, and what's the second thing?
Second, you study their biography. Where were they born? Who are their allies? What battles did they fight? Got it. For a religion, its biography is its history on Earth. You cannot understand the person by only reading their diary, and you cannot understand them by only looking at a timeline of their life. You absolutely need both.
And applying that methodology exposes this glaring blind spot, even for those who consider themselves insiders.
Yes. There is a stunning anecdote shared about this in the text.
It really is. The author, who is Iranian, notes how deeply Iranians pride themselves on their Islamic history.
Right. It's totally woven into their national identity. Specifically, their allegiance to early figures like Ali.
Exactly. Yet, he expresses this profound academic shame. He points out that if a university student came up to him and asked for a comprehensive, scientifically analyzed, original book in Persian about these major foundational figures...
About Ali or Salman Farisi.
Yeah, Salman Farisi, who was literally the first Iranian to embrace the religion. If a student asked for a book on him, he couldn't give them one.
He had to point his own students to books written by French Orientalists, like Louis Massignon, or to texts written by Christian or Sunni historians.
I mean, that is just wild. There were virtually no original analytical Persian books on the very figures they claim to revere the most.
It highlights a massive sociological gap between
Yeah.
having a deep emotional, almost tribal attachment to a religion
Yeah.
and possessing an actual methodical scientific knowledge of it.
It's like claiming to be the world's biggest fan of a band. You wear their t-shirt every day. You cry when you hear their name.
But you've never actually listened to an entire album from start to finish.
Exactly. You have all the sentiment, but you completely lack the substance.
Right.
But once we adopt this scientific methodology, once we agree to study the text and the historical biography together, we can start tackling the really big, sweeping questions.
And in the realm of sociology, there is arguably no question bigger than what actually makes society change.
What is the motor of history?
Right. What is the invisible force that causes a society to suddenly lead forward out of obscurity? Or conversely, what causes a dominant global empire to completely decay and collapse over the course of just a century or two?
This is where the sociological framework we're exploring takes a highly unique approach. It doesn't just take modern 19th century European sociological theories and try to awkwardly graft them onto ancient religious texts.
No. It attempts to extract sociological theories directly from the scripture itself.
It treats the Quran not just as a book of moral guidance, but as a repository of historical and societal laws.
The methodology involves looking really closely at the specific vocabulary used in the text to find hidden sociological mechanisms.
And a prime example of this, and perhaps the most revolutionary, is the concept of migration, known as hijra.
Historically, in standard religious education, migration was viewed almost exclusively as a specific logistical historical event.
Just the Prophet Muhammad moving his small community from Mecca to Medina to escape political persecution.
Exactly. It was seen as a tactical retreat.
But when you apply this new sociological lens, migration is revealed as something far more profound. It isn't just a physical relocation. It is the primary engine of human civilization itself.
And the scale of this claim is what makes it so fascinating. We're not talking about a theory that applies to one or two empires.
Yeah.
The premise states that all 27 known distinct civilizations in human history, from the ancient Sumerians between the Tigris and Euphrates to the sprawling civilization of modern America, were born directly out of a migration.
All 27. There is absolutely no historical exception to this rule.
None. No primitive, isolated tribe has ever spontaneously become a highly advanced civilization while remaining entirely stagnant in its original ancestral homeland.
I really want to sit with this for a second because my initial instinct is to ask, why?
Right. Why is movement the key?
Why does moving matter so much? I think about human nature. When a tribe stays in one place for thousands of years, they adapt perfectly to that specific valley or forest.
They know exactly where the water is.
They know when the berries grow, they know how to avoid the local predators, they achieve homeostasis. And biologically, homeostasis is super comfortable. But sociologically, it's a dead end. There's no pressure to invent an irrigation system if it rains predictably every single April.
Right. But when you migrate, when you pick up and move to a completely alien environment,
You shatter that homeostasis.
you introduce existential friction. The weather is different, the soil requires different tools, the local tribes speak a different language.
You literally have to innovate or you die.
Exactly. The physical friction of moving creates the intellectual and cultural friction necessary for a civilization to spark. Staying stagnant geographically guarantees stagnation culturally and scientifically.
Migration is the spark.
Migration is the spark.
Okay, so if migration is the spark, the necessary catalyst who actually holds the match.
Who drives history?
Yeah, because if you ask standard historians or philosophers, you usually get one of 4 competing theories about what pushes human events forward.
Precisely. If we're looking for the motor of history, we have to evaluate the standard models. The first is accident or anarchism.
Okay, how does that work?
This is the idea that history is entirely random. There are no underlying laws. The world wars just happened by a series of chaotic chances.
A leader died of a sudden, unpredictable illness.
Or a specific messenger's horse tripped and an entire empire fell. It's the ultimate chaotic view of human events.
Right. Then you have the second theory, determinism. And this one completely strips away human agency.
It views society like a tree growing from a seed.
Right. An oak tree has to grow, it has to drop its leaves in the winter, and eventually it has to die and rot. It has absolutely no say in the matter.
Under determinism, society is just riding on an unstoppable conveyor belt of historical stages. We are just passengers.
The third is hero worship. which is honestly deeply ingrained in our storytelling today.
Oh, everywhere. Think of philosophers like Thomas Carlyle, who famously said that the history of the world is but the biography of great men.
Or Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Right. This theory, which sometimes slurs with fascism, honestly claims that the masses are basically just inert clay. They're tools.
History is entirely dictated, molded, and driven forward by a handful of great geniuses, conquerors, or prophets.
Basically, give me 10 great personalities and I will write you the history of the world.
And the fourth is democracy. Now, obviously, democracy involves the population, but the argument here is that standard democratic theory still doesn't view the masses as the fundamental root engine of historical evolution.
It's a system of governance, a way to distribute power, but the actual evolution of society's trajectory is usually still attributed to the elected elite or to underlying economic determinism.
So, against those four models, chaos, determinism, great men, and elite democracy, what is the sociological answer derived from Islam?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the framework points out a consistent structural linguistic pattern throughout the Quran.
Okay.
Whenever the text addresses the ultimate trajectory of society, it doesn't address the elite, it doesn't blame chaos, and it doesn't point to a solitary hero. The address is constantly made to al-nas,
Al-nas, the masses.
the common people. The prophet is sent to the people are held collectively accountable, and the people are cited as the primary factor in a society's decline or advancement.
History isn't driven by blind determinism or a handful of aristocrats.
No, the motor of history, the definitive engine of change, is the masses.
Okay, hold on. I'm seeing a massive contradiction here.
Let's hear it.
We need to pause, because earlier we established that this framework views society as operating on fixed, immutable laws, which in Arabic are called sanat.
Yes.
We said society is like a living organism with scientific rules. If there are fixed, unchangeable laws governing the rise and fall of civilizations, how can the masses possibly have the free will to change history?
It's a great question.
You can't have it both ways. If the laws are fixed, free will is an illusion, and we are just back to determinism.
It is the ultimate paradox of sociology, honestly. But the framework resolves it with a truly brilliant metaphor. It introduces the concept of the agricultural engineer.
The agricultural engineer.
I want you to picture a sprawling apple orchard.
Okay, I've got the orchard in my head.
That orchard operates on the fixed, immutable laws of botany and biology. An apple tree will behave like an apple tree.
Right. It needs a certain pH in the soil. It needs a specific amount of water. It requires photosynthesis.
And the agricultural engineer, no matter how skilled they are, cannot change those fundamental laws.
They can't command an apple tree to suddenly produce oranges.
Exactly. And they cannot demand that a seed sprout if they bury it in dry sand in a dark closet. Those laws are absolutely deterministic.
Right. The engineer cannot break the laws of physics or biology. They are totally bound by reality.
Because the engineer intimately understands those immutable laws, they possess the free will to manipulate the outcome.
Oh.
By knowing exactly how the plant responds to pruning, by understanding what specific nutrients the soil lacks, by calculating the angle of the sunlight, the engineer intervenes.
They guide the fixed laws to yield better, sweeter, more abundant fruit.
Or to save a dying tree from disease. Humanity is the engineer. Human society is the orchard.
That is a phenomenal way to bridge the gap between fate and free will. You aren't completely helpless against the grand laws of society, but you can't just ignore them through pure willpower either.
Right. You have to master the laws of history in order to direct them.
So the masses are the engine. They drive change by using their free will to manipulate the fixed societal laws.
Yes.
But here is the critical pivot. The masses are often asleep. To show them how to do this, to wake them up, society occasionally needs a radical catalyst. It needs a prophet.
But this framework insists that to be a true catalyst, a true disruptor of the status quo, that person must be totally unmolded.
Unmolded, which brings us to a deep psychological and sociological concept of human development.
Right. The framework argues that every single human being, without exception, is poured into 5 specific molds.
5 molds.
These molds dictate our spirit, our biases, and our personality. If we want to understand how a disruptor functions, we really have to look at the molds that shape the rest of us.
Let's walk through those molds because they're deeply relatable to anyone listening right now. First, there is the mother.
Yes.
She builds the initial emotional, moral, and spiritual architecture of the child. There's actually a famous Jesuit saying that perfectly captures this. Give me your child until he is 7 years old, and he will remain a Jesuit until the end of his life.
The maternal influence is the foundational mold.
Second, the father. He traditionally shapes the social and authoritative perspective.
Right.
Third, the school. This builds the outer intellectual and educational dimensions of the mind.
That tells you how to think.
Exactly. Fourth, the environment. Like, are you growing up in a hyper-competitive, sprawling metropolis or a quiet, isolated farming village?
Mm.
The rhythm of your environment wires your brain.
And fifth, the general culture of the era you live in. What is the zeitgeist? What does your society value?
We are all products of these five molds. Like, if you grow up in 21st century Silicon Valley, you are shaped by a very specific culture of tech optimism, a highly competitive school system, and a hyper-connected environment.
You will view the world's problems entirely through that specific lens.
Here's where it gets really interesting. To create a true disruptor, someone capable of completely changing the trajectory of human history, not just upgrading it, the framework points out that God systematically kept the Prophet Muhammad completely out of every single one of these molds.
And this is where the history becomes incredibly compelling when viewed sociologically. Look at how this disruption was actually engineered.
Let's look at the geographic vacuum first. The Prophet was born in the Arabian Peninsula. Now, visualize a map of the world in the 6th century.
Okay.
You have massive, highly developed, deeply entrenched civilizations completely surrounding the peninsula. To the northwest, you have the Byzantine Roman Empire. To the northeast, the mighty Sassanid Persian Empire. Further east, the civilizations of India. But the Arabian Peninsula was largely isolated by a brutal, unforgiving desert.
And the framework points out that not a trace of the philosophical debates of Greece or the rigid caste systems of Persia ever successfully penetrated that desert vacuum.
He was completely insulated from the general culture mold of the surrounding superpowers. The zeitgeist of the great empires just couldn't reach him.
And then, look closely at his family and his early life. His father died before he was even born. Mold 2, the paternal structure, completely gone.
Right.
And following the custom of the time for city dwellers in Mecca, he was taken from his mother as an infant and sent deep into the desert to be raised by Bedouins.
This separated him from the intense maternal mold and completely removed him from the urban environment. Molds 1 and 4 disrupted.
He grew up as a herdsman, wandering the open desert, completely isolated from the politics and commerce of the city.
And crucially, he was unlettered. He never sat in an academy, he never studied the works of Aristotle or the Persian poets. Mold 3, the school, was completely absent.
Now stop and think about how a modern sociologist or educator would view a child in that situation today.
Oh, they would say he has no chance.
Right. An orphan, separated from his mother, entirely uneducated, living in a harsh, impoverished environment far away from any cultural or intellectual center.
To an outside observer, this looks like the absolute peak of deprivation. It looks like a recipe for historical obscurity.
But the framework argues that this exact sequence of deprivations was his greatest possible advantage.
Okay, my modern instinct is to view this as a massive sociological disadvantage. He is entirely disenfranchised from the levers of power and knowledge. Why is this an advantage? How does being outside the system give you power over it?
Because if he had grown up inside one of those great cultural molds, he might have become a brilliant product of it. But he would be trapped by its parameters.
Trapped by the rules of the game.
Imagine he was sent to an elite academy in Alexandria or Ctesiphon. He might have become a master Greek physician or a celebrated Persian philosopher.
Sure.
But his solutions to the world's problems would have been inextricably bound by the limits of Greek or Persian thought. He would have analyzed the world like a Roman or debated like a Byzantine.
Oh, wow. The framework argues that his ultimate mission was to shatter all existing molds.
Yes. To dismantle the fire temples, to upend the rigid academies, to completely erase tribal and racial divides.
And you cannot completely shatter a mold if you have been perfectly comfortably shaped by it.
Exactly. It's the ultimate outsider advantage. To build an entirely new paradigm, you can't just be a software update to the existing operating system. You have to write an entirely new code.
And you can't do that if your brain has been wired by the old system.
Right.
Understanding this specific unmolded upbringing provides a perfect bridge to the next major sociological tool the framework introduces.
Which is typology.
Right. Because if the prophet was engineered to bypass the molds, how do we evaluate the religion he introduced? How do we compare it to other systems without just comparing apples to oranges?
Typology is essentially a diagnostic tool. It's a method of classifying and comparing complex phenomena based on their core structural characteristics.
And the framework introduces a 5-point typology for analyzing any religion.
Right. It argues that if you want to truly understand what a religion is doing to a society, you don't just look at its rituals or its holidays. You interrogate these 5 specific pillars.
Let's lay out the 5 points, because it's a brilliant way to cut through the noise.
Okay, fair.
Point 1. The god or gods worshipped. What are the attributes of the deity? Are they distant, wrathful, loving, tribal?
Point 2. The prophet or founder. Who is the messenger, and what is their character?
Point 3. The book. What is the foundational text or philosophy?
Point 4. The specific circumstances of the prophet's appearance. How do they arrive on the political scene?
And point 5. The exceptional individuals produced by that religion. What does the factory output look like?
When you apply this typology across history, specifically looking at point 4, the circumstances of the prophet's appearance, a striking, undeniable pattern emerges.
The framework categorizes this into the non-Abrahamic lineage versus the Abrahamic lineage. And this realization completely shifted how I view historical power dynamics.
That's pretty wild.
The framework observes that non-Abrahamic founders or prophets, when they arrive with their new message or philosophy, almost immediately turn toward the existing secular power structures.
They seek association with the rulers, the aristocracy, or the elite to help propagate their message from the top down.
Right. They act as advisors to kings or court philosophers. They merge their spiritual message with the sword of the state.
They seek to legitimize themselves through proximity to power. But when you look at the Abrahamic prophets, figures like Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, they operate in a sociologically opposite manner.
They do not seek out the elite to form an alliance.
Not at all. They begin their missions by directly, often dangerously, rebelling against the absolute centers of power.
It is a lineage of sheer rebellion. I mean, Abraham literally takes an axe and smashes the sacred idols of his community's elite.
Moses, a shepherd, walks right up to the Pharaoh, the ultimate terrifying superpower of the ancient world, and demands the liberation of slaves.
Jesus launches a direct grassroots rebellion against both the suffocating Roman imperialism and the deeply corrupt local religious priesthood.
And Muhammad begins his mission by directly challenging the wealthy aristocrats, the slave owners, and the powerful merchants of the Quraysh tribe in Mecca.
They don't court the elite. They disrupt them. They are revolutionaries.
And that fundamental spirit of rebellion deeply shapes point 5 in the typology. The exceptional individuals produced.
Right, the factory output.
If a religion begins in rebellion against tyranny, it should produce people who stand up to tyranny. The framework uses a wonderful, highly practical analogy here.
Yeah, it says a religion or any vast ideology is essentially a factory. Its ultimate purpose is to take raw human material and produce a specific type of human being.
If you want to judge the true quality of a factory, you don't just read its polished mission statement or look at the building's architecture.
You inspect the finest goods rolling off the assembly lines.
Show me the product.
Show me the product. And the framework does this by comparing 3 distinct historical Muslim figures, arguing that they were actually shaped by 3 entirely different factories that emerged within the broader Islamic world over time.
Those factories being philosophy, Sufism or mysticism, and original Islam.
Let's look at the first factory output, Ibn Sina, who represents the factory of philosophy.
Ibn Sina, widely known in the West as Avicenna, was an absolute titan of intellect. He was a polymath, a genius of medicine, astronomy, philosophy. His texts were used in Europe for centuries.
This is brilliant.
But the framework critiques him strictly from a sociological standpoint. Socially, Ibn Sina was deeply apathetic.
Oh, interesting.
He was perfectly content to serve whatever ruler, king, or vizier paid him, regardless of how corrupt they were, as long as he was left alone in his library to continue his research.
He was intellectually brilliant, but entirely disconnected from the suffering and the struggles of the common masses.
Exactly. He is the quintessential ivory tower academic, brilliant hardware, but zero social application.
Then you look at the second factory, Sufism, the deep, esoteric, mystical branch. The product highlighted here is Hallaj.
Right.
The text describes Hallaj as a man aflame. He was a mystic, so entirely consumed by an ecstatic, burning love for the divine that his ego completely dissolved.
He famously ran through the streets of Baghdad crying out, "I am the truth," or "I am God," meaning there was no him left, only the divine presence.
It is an undeniably profound, beautiful spiritual state. But again, apply the sociological lens. What is the practical impact of that state on a starving society?
Well, practically nothing.
I have to admit, I laughed out loud at the imagery used here because it's so blunt. The framework asks you to imagine a society made up entirely of 25 million halers.
Just picture it.
25 million mystics running through the streets, weeping in spiritual ecstasy, completely detached from the physical world. The framework bluntly states that such a society would be a vast lunatic asylum.
Right. Who is baking the bread? Who is defending the borders? Who is building the hospitals?
But on the flip side, if a society was made up of 25 million Ibn Sinas, it would be a cold, calculating, deeply apathetic society of intellectuals entirely willing to serve a tyrant if the funding was right.
Neither factory produces a complete human being capable of sustaining a just civilization, which is why the framework presents the third figure, Hussein, as the ideal intended product of the original Islamic factory.
Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet, he represents the ultimate synthesis.
He possessed the profound, burning, inner spiritual life of a mystic like Hallaj, but he categorically refused to check out of society.
When faced with a deeply corrupt, tyrannical ruler, he didn't retreat to a library like Ibn Sina, and he didn't retreat to a cave to meditate.
He stood up, fought, and sacrificed his life and his family for social justice.
It's the perfect balance. A healthy society desperately needs that synthesis. It needs the rigorous thought and learning of the philosopher. It needs the profound spiritual love and empathy of the mystic. But it also absolutely requires the courage, the power, and the willingness to physically fight against oppression.
You can't just think your way out of tyranny, and you can't just pray your way out of it. You have to be engaged in the mud of reality.
And if we connect this concept of balance to the bigger picture, it leads us directly to the grandest, most existential question of the entire sociological framework.
What is the exact fundamental nature of the human being that this factory is trying to build? What does this system actually say about humanism?
This is a critical juncture because we have to completely redefine what humanism means in this context.
Right.
If you look at modern post-Renaissance Western humanism, it is generally built on the premise that religion is fundamentally anti-human.
The prevailing argument is that religion crushes man's personality, suppresses his intellect, and forces him to his knees, making him a powerless, pathetic beggar before a tyrannical, micromanaging God.
That is the dominant narrative. To elevate man, you must kill God. But the framework we are analyzing argues that the original Islamic creation story violently and explicitly contradicts this narrative.
It elevates man to a terrifying level of responsibility. But to understand the argument, we first have to understand how the creation story is written. We have to grasp the mechanics of symbolic language.
Right, because if you open an ancient religious text and read the creation story like it's a literal, peer-reviewed biology textbook, you are going to miss the point entirely, and frankly, you're going to look foolish.
The framework makes a brilliant literary argument here. Direct, purely expository language that simply lists cold facts dies very quickly.
It gives a great comparison using Persian literature, Sa'di's Gulistan versus Hafiz's poetry.
Sa'di writes in a very clear, straightforward, didactic manner. But precisely because it is so literal, many of his social ideas are now outmoded. They are locked in the amber of the 13th century.
But Hafiz's poetry is built entirely on metaphor and deep symbolism. Because he uses symbols, his work is immortal.
A reader in the 14th century and a reader in the 21st century can read the exact same line of Hafiz, and both will extract a profound, perfectly relevant meaning for their specific era.
The framework argues that religion must use symbolic language. It is attempting to communicate eternal truths across thousands of years of shifting human intellect.
It uses symbols like mud, fire, and angels so that an illiterate ancient farmer and a modern quantum physicist can read the exact same text and both glean a profound, accurate truth about the human condition.
So keeping that symbolic lens firmly in place, let's unpack this creation narrative because it is wild.
It starts with God announcing to the angels that he is going to create a vice-regent on Earth.
A vice-regent, a deputy,
Yeah.
and a representative.
Stop and think about how massive that is. Right out of the gate, before man even takes a breath, he is not introduced as a slave or an afterthought or a toy for the gods to play with, which is how many ancient myths frame it.
Man is introduced as a divine representative holding authority.
And then we look at the ingredients of this representative. The framework breaks down the deeply paradoxical dimensions of this new creature.
On one hand, man is constructed from the lowest, most insignificant base substance imaginable.
The Quran uses terms that translate to putrid, sedimentary clay, or sticky mud. It's the dirt beneath our feet.
But then God breathes into this mud the highest, most exalted, pure entity conceivable, his own spirit.
Mud and spirit. It's the ultimate cosmic paradox.
And the framework suggests that every single human being is stretched across this massive, agonizing distance. We all feel this internal war every single day.
Think about it like the difference between our biological hardware and our spiritual software.
The mud is our evolutionary programming. The instinct to preserve calories, to seek comfort, to dominate others, to just sit on the couch and stagnate. It pulls us downward.
But the spirit is that mysterious operating system update that suddenly demands we write poetry, or fight for justice, or sacrifice our own comfort to help a complete stranger. It pulls us upward toward the divine.
This profound internal stretch, this tension, is the defining characteristic of the human condition, and the narrative continues to highlight man's unique, elevated status.
The angels, who are described as being made of smokeless fire, a pure, superior, luminous substance, protest this new creation.
They look at the mud and ask God why he would create a creature that is clearly going to cause bloodshed and corruption on earth. So God sets up a test.
God teaches man the names. Now, the framework interprets these names as scientific truths, the ability to conceptualize, to understand the world through symbols and logic.
God asks the angels to name these truths, to demonstrate this conceptual knowledge, and they can't.
They are beings of pure light, but they lack this specific intellectual capacity. Only the mud creature can name them.
And this leads to a revolutionary moment in the symbolic narrative. Because man possesses this conceptual knowledge, God commands the angels, these flawless, superior beings of pure light, to prostrate themselves, to bow down before the creature of putrid mud.
What is the sociological takeaway here? It completely destroys the concept of racial or material superiority.
Nobility does not derive from what substance you are made of. It doesn't derive from your lineage, your bloodline, or your race. Nobility derives entirely from knowledge and the capacity to learn.
The angels bow to the mud because the mud knows things they don't. That is a massive subversion of expectations.
And there's another critical detail embedded in this story that the framework clarifies, which I think is a fantastic aha moment for anyone listening.
Oh, this is the big one.
It has to do with Eve and the famous, deeply culturally ingrained story of her being created from Adam's rib.
Yes, the infamous mistranslation of the rib. The framework points out that in the original Semitic languages, both Arabic and Hebrew, the word that was historically translated into European languages as rib actually has a much deeper, broader meaning.
It means nature, essence, or disposition.
So the framework is arguing that Eve wasn't made from a literal physical bone extracted out of Adam's side.
A translation that has been used for centuries to justify the idea that women are a secondary, derivative, or lesser creation.
She was created from the exact same nature, the exact same divine essence and mud as Adam. They were created simultaneously from the identical substance.
The societal impact of this is huge. It means man and woman are absolute, ontological equals from the moment of inception, directly refuting ancient patriarchal philosophies.
They are twin halves of the exact same whole. Now, the final piece of this creation puzzle is perhaps the most crucial for understanding human society, the concept of the trust.
Right. The narrative describes a cosmic moment where God offers a heavy, terrifying trust to the heavens, the earth, and the mountains.
These massive, powerful entities are terrified of the burden and refuse to bear it. But man steps forward and accepts it.
The great Persian philosopher Rumi interprets this trust as free will, and this is where everything we've discussed comes full circle. The trust is the ability to choose.
Consider the sheer magnitude of that concept. Free will is the ultimate divine burden.
It means man is the only creature in the known universe that can act in direct defiance of its own instinct. Think about the natural world. A plant won't commit suicide out of grief. It will always reach for the sun.
A tiger won't go on a hunger strike for 2 days in protest of its living conditions. If it's hungry and sees meat, it eats.
They are completely bound by their biological programming. They have no choice. Only humans have the freedom to defy their own biology.
Only humans have the capacity to be spectacularly, intentionally evil or exceptionally selflessly good. We hold the trust.
And because man is uniquely two-dimensional, possessing the heavy downward pull of the mud and the exalted upward pull of the spirit, all combined with the absolute terrifying freedom of the trust, he requires a societal system, a framework that caters to both dimensions simultaneously.
Human history, as the framework powerfully argues, is essentially a vast graveyard of societies that forgot or suppressed one of these dimensions.
Which perfectly sets up the final section of our deep dive today, the great historical imbalance. The framework clarifies a massive philosophical distinction here about where the ultimate battle of existence takes place.
In ancient religions, like Zoroastrianism or various pagan mythologies, the cosmic battle between good and evil, or light and dark, happened outside of man, in nature.
The gods fought in the sky, they battled in the oceans, they caused earthquakes.
But in the Islamic sociological framework, nature is completely unified. Nature is perfectly deterministically obedient to God's laws. There is no rebellion in the stars or the trees.
The battleground for this great cosmic war has been moved entirely inside the human being. The dualism is purely internal.
Satan isn't fighting God in the clouds. He is fighting for the soul of the individual, constantly trying to pull our free will downward toward the mud, toward stagnation and base desires.
And when you map this internal individual battle onto the grand scale of human civilizations, you see what the framework calls the tragedy of history. It's like a massive pendulum swinging wildly back and forth across centuries, completely unable to find the center.
Let's look at the mud civilizations first. The framework points to ancient Rome as the prime example.
Rome was a civilization entirely obsessed with the material dimension military conquest, the accumulation of massive wealth, architectural domination, gladiator games for visceral pleasure. It was an empire built on pure mud.
And provocatively, the framework places modern Western civilization firmly in this same category. It describes the modern era as suffering from the idiocy of purpose-free technology.
We have become obsessed with consumption, with maximizing efficiency, with building ever more complex tools, but we have completely lost the overarching spiritual purpose for why we are building them.
We are living purely in the material dimension. We have mastered the mud, but starved the spirit.
But then, inevitably, the pendulum swings to the exact opposite extreme in reaction. You get the spirit civilizations. The framework points to ancient India, heavily influenced by certain interpretations of Buddhism and the Vedas, where the highest ideal was to completely detach from the physical world.
You have men sleeping on beds of nails, engaging in extreme asceticism, completely ignoring the material progress, health, and infrastructure of the society around them.
Or look at medieval Europe, where the highest moral ideal was to lock yourself away in a secluded monastery, take a vow of silence, turn your back on the world, and pray, while disease, poverty, and tyranny completely ravaged the material world right outside the monastery walls.
And the framework even maps this violent swing onto the history of China. It notes that Chinese civilization started out very worldly, very focused on material pleasure and practical organization.
Then a figure like Lao Tse comes along and pulls the culture entirely toward extreme mysticism, internal reflection, and asceticism.
Then Confucius arrives and yanks the pendulum all the way back to strict worldliness, social order, and bureaucratic duty. Human society just keeps violently swinging between the mud and the spirit, unable to hold both.
So what does this all mean? How does this framework resolve the tragedy of history? What is the answer?
The resolution is what we can call the two-dimensional solution. The framework argues that the original iteration of Islam was structurally designed to hold both of these extreme dimensions in perfect dynamic tension.
Look back at the typology we discussed earlier. The God of this framework is depicted as both deeply wrathful regarding social injustice and oppression, much like the Old Testament Yahweh, and simultaneously infinitely merciful, loving, and compassionate like the New Testament Jesus.
It holds both the sword of justice and the embrace of mercy.
And you see it in the book, the Quran. It contains incredibly explicit, practical military and political rules for organizing a society, running an economy, and fighting oppressors.
But side by side with that, it contains the deepest, most poetic, ethical, mystical, and spiritual guidance for refining the individual soul.
And finally, the Prophet himself embodies this complete synthesis. He was a battlefield commander, a brilliant political strategist, a head of state who signed treaties and managed an economy. He was fully, deeply engaged in the messy, violent reality of the material world.
But simultaneously, he was a deeply pious ascetic who would spend his nights weeping in profound spiritual contemplation.
He didn't lock himself in a cave forever, but he also didn't just build an empire for the sake of power. He did both. He operated in both dimensions.
The ultimate conclusion that this framework drives toward is incredibly empowering and frankly a little intimidating.
It argues that man is not meant to be crushed by religion or by history. Man is God's active partner on earth.
We are carrying the heaviest burden in the universe, the trust of free will. We're explicitly meant to build the material world, to cure diseases, to invent new technologies, to organize fiercely just societies, while simultaneously elevating our spirits and keeping our moral compass pointed toward the divine.
We are magnificent creatures of mud and spirit, and we must fiercely honor both.
It's a call to profound, inescapable responsibility. You cannot outsource your destiny to blind determinism, you cannot blame the elite, and you cannot retreat from the brokenness of the world into pure, isolated mysticism.
You are the agricultural engineer of your own society.
That is a staggering amount of philosophy and sociology to process. Let's do a quick recap of the massive journey we just took.
We started by realizing that moaning about society's problems is useless. We need a strict scientific methodology to diagnose our ills.
We learned that the masses, not random accidents, and not lone heroes, are the true, fundamental motor of historical change.
We saw how the ultimate disruptor was systematically kept out of society's 5 molds so he could shatter them, leading to a new typology where true spiritual leaders are rebels against corrupt power rather than comfortable allies of it.
And finally, we looked at the architecture of ourselves. We are paradoxical creatures woven from putrid mud and divine spirit, entrusted with the terrifying, beautiful gift of free will, tasked with balancing the material and the spiritual in a world that is constantly trying to pull us to one extreme or the other.
It is a framework that completely reframes how you look at the broad sweep of human history. But more importantly, it changes how you look at yourself in the mirror.
It really does.
And as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to mull over as you go about your day.
Okay, let's hear it.
If our greatest divine gift is the trust, our free will, our unique ability to consciously act against our base instincts, how do we protect it today? We live in an era where massive billion-dollar algorithms are explicitly designed to predict our choices, to keep us endlessly scrolling, to harvest our attention, and to push us constantly toward our most sedimentary, passive mud instincts.
In giving into this digital determinism, are we surrendering the very thing that makes us greater than the angels?
Think about that the next time you feel yourself sinking into the comfortable mud of a 2-hour doom scroll.
That is the defining question for our modern era.
Thank you so much for coming along on this deep dive. Keep learning, keep questioning the molds around you, and keep striving for the spirit. We'll see you next time.
I want you to imagine, just for a moment, that the psychological struggle happening inside your own mind right now, that friction between your highest ideals and your basest instincts. Imagine that's not just some private, isolated phenomenon.
Right, it's not just a personal issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Imagine that this internal tug-of-war is actually the exact same mechanism driving the global economy. Like, imagine it's the identical force that birthed modern capitalism, the same dynamic that dictates how you earn a living, and the literal engine behind the most ancient human creation myths. What if the macro and the micro aren't, separate domains of study, but simply different battlefields in a single, unbroken, transhistorical dialectical war?
It's a huge shift in perspective. I mean, it really requires a complete dismantling of the intellectual architecture we usually rely on. Because, well, modern academia trains us to compartmentalize everything, right?
Oh, totally. We put everything in neat little boxes.
We do. We isolate economics into one department, psychology into another, theology into a third, and, theoretical physics into a fourth. But when you strip away those artificial dividers, you are left confronting this continuous vibrating tension that runs straight from the formation of the cosmos down to the way human beings distribute wealth.
And breaking down those dividers is our mission for this deep dive today. We're plunging into excerpts from On the Sociology of Islam by the 20th century Iranian sociologist and thinker Ali SHARI'ATI. For those of you familiar with the sociology of religion, Shariati is often recognized for his synthesis of Marxist dialectics, history, and Islamic thought. But we're examining this text today purely as a mechanism.
Right, as a sociological framework.
Yes, a radically different framework for viewing the friction of human existence. And we should be clear up front, regardless of your personal theological leanings, we're just reporting on these ideas. The way this text attempts to unify science, human nature, and class struggle, it offers a staggeringly cohesive lens on reality. We're not endorsing it, just imparting the concepts so you can explore this fascinating perspective.
And it is fascinating because Shariati does not treat ancient theology as, abstract dogma meant to be chanted passively in a corner.
Right.
He treats it as an intensely practical, almost mathematical formula for understanding societal evolution. But to really grasp his sociological conclusions, we actually cannot start with human society.
We have to zoom way out.
Way out. We have to look at the foundational premise of the universe in which that society operates. We have to examine how Shariati fundamentally re-engineers the concept of tawhid.
Okay, so we generally understand tawhid as monotheism, right? But Shariati strips away the purely numerical definition. He isn't interested in a mere head count of the divine, like the idea that God is one as opposed to two or three. He frames tawhid as this comprehensive, all-encompassing cosmological worldview. In his framework, the entire universe is a single, living, conscious organism possessing will, intelligence, and purpose. He actually refers to the universe as an empire.
And the word empire is doing some heavy lifting there.
How so?
Well, think about it. An empire implies a singular unifying authority and a cohesive direction, regardless of how diverse its individual provinces might be. Right?
Ah, I see. So it's all governed by one central rule.
Exactly. And he deliberately contrasts this with the opposing worldview, which is shirk. Now, while shirk is traditionally translated as polytheism or idolatry, Shariati redefines it sociologically as a feudal worldview.
A feudal worldview. That's an interesting way to put it.
Yeah, it's the belief that existence is discordant, chaotic, and full of independent, clashing poles, like a bunch of feudal lords constantly warring with each other.
So a worldview steeped in shirk would be one that perpetually divides reality into, like, irreconcilable binaries. Things like this physical world versus some ethereal hereafter, or the corrupt body versus the pure spirit, or light versus darkness.
Which, if you think about it, is how a vast majority of human beings operate today, even completely secularly.
Oh, for sure. We do it all the time.
We constantly separate the material from the meaningful. Shariati argues that viewing the universe as inherently fragmented is the absolute essence of shirk. And he goes to great lengths to distinguish his unified vision from pantheism.
Right, because he doesn't think everything literally is God.
No, not at all. He rejects the idea that a physical tree or a piece of dirt is literally God, just as he rejects pure materialism, which claims only the physical tree and the dirt exist and nothing else. To bridge the gap between a perfect unseen essence and a tangible physical universe, he relies heavily on phenomenology.
Okay, but if Tawhid posits a universe completely devoid of inherent contradiction, if matter and meaning are flawlessly aligned, how does Shariati account for the sheer brutal friction we observe in nature? I mean, does he just write off entropy or the violence of a supernova as some kind of glitch in the empire?
He doesn't see those forces as glitches or contradictions at all. He sees them as the very mechanics of a unified system. He points to the Quran's constant reference to natural phenomena, oceans, night, day, earthquakes as signs or ayat.
Right, signs pointing to something else.
Exactly. He argues this is a deeply scientific concept that aligns perfectly with modern phenomenology and physics. Science, by its very nature, studies the appearances or manifestations of an unseen essence. You don't study gravity itself, you study the falling apple.
And this is where he brings Einstein into his framework, which I gotta say is a fascinating pivot for a sociological text.
It really is. The inclusion of Einstein is absolutely vital to his argument. Shariati notes that modern physics prove matter and energy aren't the primary terminal realities of the cosmos.
Right, E equals mc squared.
Right. They are alternating manifestations of a single, invisible, unknowable essence. E equals mc squared essentially demonstrates that mass and energy can be converted into each other. They are two sides of the exact same coin. So Shariati uses this to argue that physics and chemistry aren't enemies of a unified theological worldview. They are the exact tools required to study the physical signs of that unseen unity.
He uses an analogy here that I think clarifies the mechanics of this relationship brilliantly. He compares the unseen essence and physical nature to an individual's awareness of their own limb. So if you consider your own hand, your consciousness isn't an alien entity to it.
No, it's inherently connected.
Right. But your consciousness also isn't physically located in the hand, nor is it made of the same cellular material.
And the physical limb itself, completely severed from that invisible consciousness, is just inert biological matter. It has absolutely no will. The consciousness animates the matter without ever being reducible to it.
It makes me think of if we map that onto modern hardware, it's akin to the relationship between software code and a physical robotic arm.
Oh, that's a great modern parallel.
Yeah, because the code isn't made of steel or wiring, but the steel and wiring are completely devoid of purpose or directed movement without the code. They're distinct in substance, but entirely unified in operation.
Which is exactly why Shariati insists that any fundamental contradiction we perceive, any division between science and religion, matter and spirit, is an artificial construct born of a flawed, feudal worldview.
A shirk worldview.
Exactly, because if the cosmos itself doesn't contain inherent, irreconcilable contradictions, then any philosophy that accepts societal class divisions or racial hierarchies as natural laws of the universe is fundamentally fractured.
That sets up a massive collision course, though. Because if we accept his premise that the cosmos is a flawlessly unified empire, we immediately crash into the reality of human behavior. I mean, human history is nothing but division, class warfare, and inherent contradiction. How does a perfectly unified universe produce a species that is constantly at war with itself?
And Shariati addresses that head-on by moving from the macro level of cosmology down to the micro level of human anthropology. He posits that while the universe is unified, humanity is structurally designed as a contradiction. We are a dialectical reality.
A walking contradiction.
Literally. And to illustrate the mechanics of this, he turns to the philosophical archetype of Adam.
And we should note, he strips away the literalist biological reading of the Adam narrative here. He isn't talking about the first hominid walking around. Adam is deployed as a conceptual framework for the entire human species.
Right. Adam represents all of us. He distills humanity into a structural formula, the spirit of God combined with putrid clay.
Wow.
Yeah. Those are the two infinite poles defining human existence. The putrid clay represents absolute lowness, sediment, stagnation, and complete passivity. It's like a heavy gravity pulling us down toward base selfishness and immobility.
And the spirit of God, conversely, represents infinite exaltation, pure awareness, continuous movement, and boundless creative power. So humanity isn't just a composite of these two elements, like they're mixed together in a bowl. We are the active battlefield between them. We are smashed between the highest possible high and the lowest possible low.
He draws a parallel to Blaise Pascal's assertion that man is a being intermediate between two infinites. But Shariati injects a heavy dose of dialectical tension into it. Man is a hesitation.
A hesitation. That's such a poetic way to frame it.
It is. We are a pendulum swinging endlessly between the thesis of the spirit, which is the upward pull toward perfection, and the antithesis of the clay, which is that heavy drag toward stagnation. And because we possess free will, we are continuously forced in every single fraction of a second to choose our trajectory.
But wait, if the destination of the spirit is an infinite absolute, then by definition a human being can never actually arrive. There's no finish line where you cross a tape and say, okay, cool, I have fully achieved the spirit.
And that is the absolute crux of his anthropological theory. Human evolution never ceases. Because the distance between the clay and the infinite spirit is limitless, humanity is defined as a constant, unrelenting migration.
He goes so far as to call fixed standards disgraceful, which, in a historical landscape where institutional philosophies usually demand strict adherence to immovable, fixed standards, suggesting that reaching a plateau as a failure of the human condition is a radical departure.
It's extremely radical, and it leads directly into his blistering critique of institutionalized belief systems. He looks at the etymology of the word for religion in many Islamic contexts, which is madhab, and he points out that it literally translates to path or road.
A road, just a road.
Yes, a road is a utility. Its sole purpose is to facilitate transit from one location to another.
Okay, I have to use an analogy here because this blew my mind. It's the equivalent of purchasing a state-of-the-art treadmill, specifically to train for a marathon, right? The treadmill is the mechanism for progress. But instead of running on it, you start obsessing over its aesthetics. You polish it every day. You build a shrine around it in your living room.
Right, you never turn it on.
Exactly. You write extensive academic papers defending the superiority of your treadmill's brand against your neighbor's treadmill. You weep at the sheer beauty of the machine, but you never actually plug it in, and you never take a single step on it.
And the tragedy of that scenario, in Shariati's view, is the illusion of accomplishment. People turn the road into a park. They construct elaborate rest stops on the highway, they sit down on the pavement, and they spend centuries venerating the asphalt.
They worship the road.
They do. He argues that being completely lost in the wilderness because you never found the path is actually a preferable state to sitting stationary on the path, convinced you have arrived at your destination simply because you recognize the road under your feet.
That is, wow. Okay, so the subjective internal dialectic is clear. We are a pendulum swinging between progression and stagnation. But a pendulum in a vacuum doesn't create history. History requires friction. So where does this internal psychological war between clay and spirit actually materialize in the objective physical world.
Well, history, according to Shariati, does not begin with the internal hesitation of Adam. History ignites with the first objective material conflict. It begins with the collision of Cain and Abel.
Okay, and we have to completely discard the simplistic morality tale version of this narrative, the idea that it's just an ancient Sunday school warning about the evils of fratricide.
Right, it's so much deeper than that.
Shariati dissects the Cain and Abel narrative as the encoded record of the single greatest economic and social revolution in human development.
He breaks down the symbology of their respective livelihoods to prove this. Abel represents the epoch of pastoralism, hunting, fishing, and primitive socialism.
Primitive socialism.
Yes. In this era, nature was abundant and universally accessible. Oceans, forests, and grazing lands were at the disposal of the entire community. Ownership was a collective reality. Men viewed each other as brothers because they were equally reliant on and equally provided for by an unfenced nature.
And this communal pastoral era is represented by Abel's sacrifice in the narrative.
Right.
Which is a young, highly valuable red-haired camel. It is the absolute pinnacle product of a system of animal husbandry.
Precisely. Cain, however, introduces a devastating paradigm shift. He represents the advent of agriculture, which brings with it private ownership and monopoly, and his sacrifice is a handful of withered yellow corn.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of why agriculture is the villain in this sociological framework, because it isn't the act of planting a seed that causes the rupture. It's the psychological and legal infrastructure that agriculture demands. A pastoral society is nomadic and fluid, but a field of wheat, that requires a boundary. It requires a fence.
And the fence is the catalyst. For the very first time in human existence, an individual possessed both the capability and the motivation to arrogate a specific segment of nature exclusively for themselves, forcibly depriving the rest of the community of access to it. That physical boundary birthed the concept of private property.
Shariati presents a jarring analogy for this transition. He describes humanity in the era of Abel as a harmonious flock of migratory birds flying in a unified formation.
It's a beautiful image.
But then, the moment they discover the carrion of private property on the ground below, the formation shatters. They descend upon the carcass and instantly transform into a savage gang of vultures, violently pecking and tearing at each other to hoard a piece of the dead meat.
It's a violent image, but it perfectly mirrors the violent disruption of the social fabric. And Shariati actually makes a crucial intervention into Marx's theory at this exact juncture.
Oh, right. This is where he disagrees with Marx.
Yeah. So Marx argued that ownership is the foundational source of power in a society. But Shariati points out a temporal flaw in that logic regarding the origins of civilization. At the dawn of agrarian society, there were no legal frameworks, no land deeds, no inheritance courts to enforce ownership.
Right. You couldn't just stake a claim and have the local zoning board back you up. The only way to erect that fence and keep others out was sheer brute force. Coercion preceded capital.
Exactly the point. Power and coercion were the initial instruments that allowed a stronger individual to seize the land. Force birthed private ownership. Only after the monopoly was secured did the powerful class create the legal and societal frameworks to legitimize and protect their stolen property. Ownership simply legalized the initial violence.
And this instantly bifurcates society. The unified fraternal structure of Abel is cleaved into two distinct classes. You have the rulers and minority who have monopolized land far in excess of their personal physical needs and who therefore require the labor of others to extract its value. And then you have the rule of the majority who have been locked out of the natural abundance and possess absolutely nothing of value except their own physical labor.
Now, to fully solidify this sociological reading, Shariati systematically dismantles the Freudian interpretation of the Cain and Abel conflict.
Oh, this part is brilliant.
It really is. There is a deep-seated tradition in the lore suggesting the root of the fratricide was sexual rivalry. The narrative claims Cain and Abel each had twin sisters, and Cain desired Abel's betrothed because she was physically superior. A strict Freudian analysis would latch onto this, arguing that the root of all human conflict is primal sexual drive and the desire for reproductive dominance.
But Shariati finds a glaring logical inconsistency in that reading. He points back to the sacrifices. If Cain was consumed by an uncontrollable, primal sexual frenzy, a passion so overwhelming it drove him to commit the very first murder in human history just to secure this woman, why would he offer God a handful of withered yellow corn to win the dispute?
It defies all behavioral logic. If your entire biological imperative is screaming at you to win this mate, you don't offer your lowest tier rotting surplus as a bribe. You offer your absolute best.
It's the equivalent of a modern venture capitalist trying to secure a multi-billion-dollar, life-changing merger by offering the board of directors a half-eaten sandwich they found in the backseat of their car.
That's exactly what it's like.
It proves that the driving force wasn't a hypersexual primal passion. The withered corn is evidence of a completely different kind of psychological rot.
Shariati argues that Cain's fundamental human virtues had been hollowed out by his environment. Cain was not genetically or inherently evil. He shared the exact same father and the same primordial human nature as Abel. What mutated him was the system he represented.
The system of agriculture.
Right. The infrastructure of private ownership, the anxiety of hoarding, and the relentless drive for monopoly had effectively suffocated his spirit and dragged him entirely down into the putrid clay. The agricultural system destroyed his humanity before he ever raised his hand against his brother.
And Abel, conversely, remained embedded in a system of equality and collective reliance. His humanity was completely intact. I mean, even when faced with imminent death, Abel declares, "I will not raise my hand against you." He refuses to participate in the mechanics of violence introduced by the new paradigm.
The chilling reality of the narrative, however, is the outcome. Abel's system of peaceful, primitive socialism offered zero material resistance to the aggressive acquisition of Cain. Abel was slaughtered, and he died without an heir. Cain survived, and Cain propagated.
Which means every single human being alive today and every society detailed in the historical record exists on Cain's timeline. We are all the direct heirs of the fratricide. We are operating inside Cain's infrastructure.
And if we accept that premise that the entirety of recorded history is the unbroken continuation of Cain's system, then the entire discipline of sociology must be recalibrated around this continuous dialectic. And this is what brings us to Shariati's direct confrontation with Karl Marx's theory of historical materialism.
Right. So Marx categorized the progression of human history into distinct evolutionary stages based on the structure of society. He outlined the march from primitive socialism to slavery, then to the serfdom of the Middle Ages, evolving into the bourgeoisie, and finally arriving at modern industrial capitalism.
Right. Marx saw those as fundamental structural shifts.
Exactly. In the Marxist view, transitioning from a Roman latifundia driven by slave labor to a 19th century textile mill driven by wage labor represents a fundamental structural transformation of the world.
But Shariati argues that Marx committed a profound categorical error here. He claims Marx confused the superstructure of society with its foundational structure. In Shariati's historical framework, there are only ever two structures: the pole of Cain, representing the ruler, the owner, and the monopolizer, and the pole of Abel, representing the ruled, the exploited, and the dispossessed.
So, whether you are a slave enduring the whip of a Roman patrician, or a medieval serf legally bound to a tract of land owned by a feudal lord, or like a modern gig economy worker driving a vehicle you don't own for an algorithmic platform that dictates your wages. Shariati would argue the actual structure of your reality hasn't shifted an inch.
Not an inch. The aesthetics have evolved tremendously, sure. The tools of production mutated from stone spades to iron plows to autonomous servers, the legal terminology masking the relationship change. The standard of living may have even improved for some.
But the core is the same.
Exactly. All of those elements, the tools, the laws, the social contracts, they are merely the superstructure. The underlying foundational structure where one group possesses a monopoly on the means of production while another group possesses nothing but their labor to sell remains absolutely static. It is simply the structure of Cain, endlessly rebranding itself.
It is a terrifying concept, honestly. The idea that every major societal revolution was just Cain changing his clothes. You migrate from a feudal agrarian landscape into a hyper-connected metropolis, and you suffer the illusion that you have entered a completely new era of civilization. But the fundamental power dynamic is identical.
It is grim. But as society complexifies, Cain can no longer rely solely on the crude brute force of the original fratricide. You know, a sophisticated society requires a sophisticated mechanism of control. So Shariati details how the pole of Cain splinters into three distinct but symbiotic dimensions.
The three faces of Cain.
Yes. First, politics, personified by the pharaoh. This is the symbol of absolute coercive state power and physical violence. Second, economics, personified by Croesus or Qarun in the Islamic tradition. This is the symbol of hoarded wealth, market monopoly, and financial exploitation.
And the third dimension is the one Shariati reserves his most venomous critique for: religion, personified by Balaam.
Balaam represents the official, institutionalized, deceitful clergy. Now, Shariati does not view true religion as the opiate of the masses, unlike Marx.
Right, that's a key distinction.
Very key. But he fiercely argues that institutionalized religion, the religion of the state, operates exactly as an opiate. The role of Balaam is to stupefy the exploited class.
To keep them sedated.
Yes. When the Pharaoh's whip and Croesus's financial stranglehold generate unbearable friction, Balaam steps in to anesthetize the wound. He uses the vocabulary of the divine to justify the inequality, convincing the oppressed that their suffering is the ordained will of God, and that rebellion against the Pharaoh is a rebellion against the heavens.
It's a flawless triad of oppression. The politician threatens your physical life, the capitalist controls your means of survival, and the corrupt cleric holds your eternal soul hostage to ensure you don't revolt against the first two. They are the three faces of Cain, operating in perfect symbiosis.
And opposing this triad is the historical front of Abel. But since Abel died, who inherits his pole in the dialectic?
Right, because he didn't have any kids.
Exactly. Shariati identifies the opposition as a unified front, God and al-nas. Al-nas is the Arabic term for the people, or the masses. And here, Shariati introduces a linguistic and theological observation that completely upends traditional religious power dynamics.
Tell me about that.
He observes that in the Quran, whenever the text addresses social, economic, or historical matters, as opposed to cosmic or purely creedal matters, the words God and the people are virtually synonymous and interchangeable.
Wow. Okay, and he provides a concrete example of this that has massive economic implications. Take the phrase, property belongs to God. For centuries, monarchs and the institutional church have weaponized that exact phrase. They argue, property belongs to God, and since I am the divinely appointed sovereign or the head of the church, the property rightfully belongs to me.
And Shariati argues that is a deliberate, cynical mistranslation born of shirk. In the sociology of Tawhid, property belongs to God translates directly in social practice to property belongs to the people as a whole. It does not belong to a courting individual, a corporate monopoly, or a wealthy religious elite.
And the term al-nas itself carries specific weight, doesn't it? It isn't just a plural word for a crowd of random, disconnected individuals.
No, it is a singular noun with a plural sense. It conceptualizes society as an independent, living entity. Shariati points out that the Quran opens in the name of God and concludes its final chapter in the name of the people, al-nas. The ultimate transhistorical struggle is not merely a material clash over resources, it is an ideological war.
Shirk versus Tawhid.
Yes, it is the religion of shirk, which exists to manufacture artificial boundaries and justify class discrimination, warring endlessly against the religion of Tawhid, which demands absolute human unity, the dismantling of monopolies, and the abolition of false idols of power.
But this brings us to an incredibly bleak impasse. If the game has been thoroughly rigged by the descendants of Cain since the dawn of agriculture, and every historical revolution has just been a reshuffling of the same deck, what does a victory for the pole of Abel even look like? If we are trapped in the superstructure, what is the blueprint for actually breaking the foundational structure of Cain?
Well, Shariati does not leave us in a state of historical determinism. He outlines a vision for the culmination of this dialectic, which requires the resurrection of Abel's system through the creation of what he terms the Ummah and the cultivation of the ideal man.
We really need to clearly define Ummah here, because in contemporary usage, it has been diluted to simply mean the demographic global population of Muslims. Shariati's definition is intensely dynamic and active.
It is. He traces the etymological root of Ummah to a word denoting path, intention, or movement. Therefore, an Ummah cannot be a static society based on genetic lineage, geographical borders, or historical nostalgia. Furthermore, it is not a society of blind liberalism where a collection of individuals simply exists near each other pursuing isolated, conflicting desires.
So what is it?
An Ummah is a mobilized group of individuals who share a unified ideology and are moving intentionally and collectively toward a defined destination.
And the economic infrastructure required to sustain this Ummah.
It demands the complete revival of Abel's paradigm. Absolute economic equity. It envisions a classless society where the sources of production are liberated from monopoly and returned to the collective ownership of the people.
That sounds a lot like socialism.
It does, but Shariati sharply distinguishes this from Western materialist socialism. In his view, a purely materialist socialism solves the economic friction but leaves the human spirit stranded. In the Ummah, economic equity is the foundation, the baseline infrastructure. It is not the ceiling. The ultimate objective of this equitable society is to serve as a greenhouse for the cultivation of the ideal man.
The concept of the ideal man, the vice-regent of God, it sounds dangerously close to a Nietzschean Übermensch. How does Shariati avoid falling into the trap of venerating a ruthless, hyper-competent tyrant?
He avoids it by demanding the absolute harmonization of the two infinites we discussed earlier, the clay and the spirit. We currently live in a paradigm that forces a bifurcation of human potential.
Right, we tend to idolize extremes.
Exactly. We idolize the hyper-competent, ruthless architect of industry who reshapes the physical world but possesses a hollow sociopathic emotional core. Conversely, we revere the hyper-spiritual ascetic who achieves profound inner peace meditating in isolation, but who exerts zero influence on the material suffering of the oppressed.
Shariati explicitly rejects that separation. He describes the ideal man as a bird flying with both wings. This individual refuses the false dichotomy between power and piety. Shariati says this figure holds the sword of Caesar in his hand, capable of wielding immense material and political power, but he possesses the bleeding heart of Jesus in his breast.
It's a powerful combination.
Yeah. He analyzes the world with the rigorous, uncompromising logic of Socrates, but he loves humanity with the consuming, irrational spiritual passion of a mystic like College.
He is a rebel against the slave-owning structures of Cain, fighting with the ferocity of Spartacus, yet his ultimate message is one of profound love and reconciliation. He is the living resolution of the human pendulum. But to achieve this state, to become the ideal man, Shariati argues that an individual must successfully break out of four specific intersecting prisons.
The four prisons. I love this concept. The first three are external constraints: nature, history, and society. These are the deterministic forces that attempt to mold an individual based on their geography, their era, and their social class.
Right, we are born constrained by the physical laws of nature, the inherited baggage of our historical moment, and the cultural dictates of our specific society. But Shariati argues that humanity is uniquely equipped to break out of these three prisons using the tools of science and technology.
Because we can understand them.
Exactly. By deeply understanding the immutable laws of physics, sociology, and history, we can manipulate them. We build hydroelectric dams to conquer the prison of nature's floods. We develop medicine to break the prison of biological disease. We utilize sociological analysis to dismantle oppressive political structures.
But there is a massive glaring irony here. We have essentially mastered the first three prisons. We have split the atom, mapped the human genome, and built autonomous vehicles. Yet for all our technological supremacy, science is entirely catastrophically impotent when it comes to breaking us out of the fourth prison.
The prison of the self, the ego, the internal gravitational pull of the putrid clay.
Science can sequence a virus, but it cannot cure human greed. In fact, one could argue our technological mastery over nature and society has only amplified the prison of the self. We use the tools that broke the first three prisons to build algorithmic echo chambers that feed our narcissism and hyper-accelerate Cain's desire for monopoly.
Which is exactly why Shariati insists that the methodology for breaking the fourth prison must be fundamentally different. You cannot rationalize your way out of selfishness. You cannot build a machine to conquer your own ego. The only mechanism powerful enough to shatter the prison of the self is love.
Love.
Yes, a profound, self-annihilating rebellion against one's own base instincts.
And this connects the entire theoretical framework into a closed loop. The cosmos is a flawlessly unified organism. The human being is a messy dialectical hesitation between spirit and clay. By utilizing science to conquer the external world and love to conquer the internal ego, the individual resolves their internal contradiction. They subdue the putrid clay and align completely with the infinite spirit.
And in that alignment, the human being transcends mere survival. They become an active co-creator with the unified universe. Shariati articulates a beautiful vision of human creativity in this state. He argues that for the ideal man, art is no longer a trivial diversion.
It's not just entertainment.
No, it ceases to be a commodity traded by the financial descendants of Croesus, and it ceases to be a propaganda tool wielded by the political descendants of the pharaoh. Art becomes the creative pen of God, entrusted to humanity to construct a second paradise within the material world.
A second paradise. Because when you finally shatter the prison of the ego, your motivations fundamentally shift. You don't act ethically because you fear the punitive violence of the state, nor do you act charitably because you fear the spiritual retribution of Balaam's hell. Goodness simply becomes your innate nature. You become the consciousness perfectly and effortlessly animating the hand.
It is a staggering, deeply demanding vision for the trajectory of the human species. It dares to imagine a horizon where the ancient, brutal dialectic of Cain and Abel is finally exhausted, not merely through a superficial restructuring of tax codes or government regimes, but through a profound, foundational spiritual evolution of the human animal itself.
We have covered immense intellectual territory today. We began by observing a universe not as a chaotic void, but as a purposeful, unified empire. We zoomed into the architecture of the human soul to witness the relentless, agonizing swing of the pendulum between mud and infinite spirit.
We really went everywhere.
We did. We watched that internal friction detonate into objective history with the story of Cain and Abel, revealing that human civilization is largely an unbroken, grueling economic war between the forces of monopoly and the forces of equality. And finally, we examined the demanding blueprint for escape, shattering the four prisons to become a bird capable of flying with both wings.
It is a framework that leaves very little room for passive observation. It demands that you re-audit everything from the economic systems you participate in to the architecture of your own ego.
It demands an audit, and it demands movement. Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you, the listener, to wrestle with. We discussed Shariati's devastating critique of those who take the path, the mechanism meant for transit, and turn it into a comfortable, stagnant park.
The treadmill analogy.
Exactly. I want you to critically examine your own reality. Look at your career trajectory, your daily routines, your political affiliations, or your deepest philosophical and ethical commitments. What is a path in your life? A daily habit, a belief system you aggressively defend online, a book you proudly display on your shelf that you have covertly transformed into a sacred park? Are you actually engaged in the grueling, unglamorous friction of walking that road toward a better version of yourself and your society? Or have you simply constructed an incredibly comfortable gold-leafed bench on the shoulder of the highway, deeply convinced that aggressively admiring the map is the exact same thing as making the journey? Because if you were just sitting on the bench, admiring the aesthetics of your own beliefs, the dialectical war is still raging around you, and Cain is still winning.
A deeply necessary, uncomfortable question to carry forward.
Thank you for joining us on this exhaustive deep dive. Keep questioning the structure, keep walking the path, and we will see you next time.